today, largely family is, hey, you have some kids and it's, have two, and they're fun, but they cost a lot. We want to change the perspective that those kids are those living messages to the generations we'll never see. It will hold this country together. It will hold the world together because we were meant to have impact. The whole Genesis idea, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, make the world more beautiful and more creative. So we want to teach that idea and have students grab a hold of that so they can take it back to their communities and live that out in their own families, but then to be the purveyors of this message as well.
Bill High is the Chief Executive Officer of the Signatory, a global Christian foundation. And prior to joining the foundation in 2000, Bill was in part a partner with Blackwell Sanders law firm, both nationally and internationally known. He's also the founder of I Donate, a fundraising software company that serves the nonprofit community. I Donate provides online marketing solutions for nonprofits to market and receive gifts of all kinds, including cash, text, credit card, and non-cash gifts, all for kingdom purposes. I don't know of anybody that really understands more the arena of stewardship, generosity, of how to make families healthy like Bill High. Bill, welcome.
Well, glad to be here.
Now, give us, if you would, just your background.
Well, I was a poor kid on the other side of the tracks, and I tell people that both sides of the tracks look pretty bad. So, didn't know Christ at all, didn't ever grow up in a church, didn't darken the door of a church until I was about 8 years old, and there was a family down the street, a church plant, a Southern Baptist church that family down the street brought us a children's Bible storybook, and I began to read that thing, and that's how I came to know the person of Christ. So it was just God drawing me to himself.
And then you grew as a believer. I mean, who were the spiritual mentors to help you?
My oldest brother, so my dad died right when I was 12 years old, but my oldest brother had gone away to college at that time, and he became a Christian through the Navigator ministry. And he came back and showed me how to begin to read the Bible, to have a quiet time, and to memorize verses. So here I was, 12, 13 years old, and God was giving me a hunger for his word. And so even through high school and the years beyond, I was in God's word. And so that just began to build a foundation in me that would, continues to this day.
And, with such a strong Christian upbringing and development, you ended up being a lawyer. How did that happen?
That kind of doesn't make sense, does it? What happened is my undergraduate degree was in education. And I was really fortunate because I was able to get out and teach for a semester, and because I graduated in 3.5 years. And so in that semester of teaching, I had a friend who said, hey, you ought to apply to law school because I am. So I started applying to law school. And in that semester of teaching, it helped me see that there was something more that I could do, something more that if I had some different skills. And so the last law school I applied to gave me a full ride to go to law school, tuition, books, and then ultimately they changed it to a living stipend. Wow. And so it was like God was saying, here's the neon light, you need to go through this door. So I did. So I was just taking the next step, and that was it, to go to law school.
And how many years practicing law?
Almost 12 years, so big law firm. It was a great experience. Kind of the funny thing is that, when you look for mentors in your life, one of my mentors at that law firm was a guy who was not a believer at all. But he really taught me how to ask questions and how to listen well and to develop strategy around how you serve clients and how you solve problems. So it was just a great experience, great preparation for what I do today.
And what was the trigger to move from the law world into the nonprofit world?
Well, over the years, because I'd had this strong faith background of just being in God's Word, even back to when I was 17, God gave me the call to tend the flock of God. that's your charge, not by constraint, but willingly. So I didn't know what that meant. I looked at going to seminary, looked at going into missions, and so the next step was college, because I didn't have a lot of teaching or somebody that was really mentoring me at that time. And so I went to college, went to law school, practiced law. But as I was practicing law, it was like God was saying, hey, there was a time where he's come knocking on the door. It's like, hey, it's time for you to do this. It's time for you to tend the flock. And so I just started doing the next thing, which is I got involved with different ministries, and particularly I was involved with an urban ministry. And so as we were slugging it away in the trenches of urban ministry, which you know about, it's a difficult place to raise money.
Right.
And so one of the leaders in that movement said, Bill, we need to you need to help us solve this problem of how we can bring more resources to the trenches. And that was a couple-year journey before we stumbled in this space of the Christian Donor Advised Fund world.
Now, you are the Chief Executive Officer of the Signatory, so what was the prelude to that? You know, obviously involved with this urban ministry. Mm-hmm. You transitioned to National Christian Foundation. Give us the whole trajectory from
So as we were working in that urban ministry, we started looking at different models where we could raise money for ministries. And we looked at a leadership foundation model. There were different models that we looked at, but all of them would require us to be fundraisers. And we didn't want to be competing with the very ministries that we were helping. We wanted to serve those ministries. So we ended up stumbling into this world of the Christian Donor Advised Fund. So the Donor Advised Fund world is like a big bank. People create accounts inside of us to do their giving. It's simple, it's easy. The world's grown by 60% in the past year. It's the easiest, fastest form of charitable giving that's going on today. We saw it as a service, a way to serve not only donors and ministries. And so that's the road that we went down. We ended up with a group of board members founding what was then called the Servant Foundation. And so our goal was to bring the donors and the doers together at the early outset. So that's how we began. We affiliated with the National Christian Foundation. And so for the first 11 years of our existence, we were known as the Servant Foundation, working with donors in particular all across the country.
And the office you led was a forerunner. I mean, you had an incredible impact.
We were the first. We were the guinea pigs. We were trying to figure out, along with the National Christian Foundation, how this generosity movement would spread around the country. So, and I like being out on front. I like being on the edge and figuring things out as we go. You know, it's the proverbial build the plane while you're flying it. And that's what we did. But the generosity space, as you know, has just grown so dramatically. We're at the cusp of one of the world's greatest wealth transfers ever. And so we're right on the cutting edge.
Define that wealth transfer, where we're at right now at this particular era.
Boston College has done the research. There's other groups have done the research. This is a sociological phenomenon of what's happened. Basically, as you came out of the World War II and the Korean War, there's a whole generation of people that were known as the savers. They were the people that have accumulated wealth. It's like my wife's grandmother, who was 91 years of age when she passed away. You know, she didn't ever have a lot, but when she passed away, we found out she had a good little sized bank account because she saved. Mm-hmm. You know, she saved the little Meals on Wheels Reynolds wrap, you know, the tin foil. I mean, she had a whole closet full of them. That generation were savers, and so they have accumulated a lot of wealth. That some of that greatest generation is still alive, and they're going to be part of the wealth transfer, but they have also been passing money down to the boomer generation, largest generation that we've had up to now, so about 78 million boomers. And as the boomers came out of the 60s, there were so many of them, they had to start businesses. And so the boomers have experienced the greatest peacetime era ever for building businesses that we've ever seen. And so between the war generations and the boomers, we have this huge wealth transfer that's going to occur. $69 trillion. So the number's actually gone up. It had been about 10 trillion less. So 69 trillion that's going to change hands, largely held in the hands of the war generations and the boomers.
And what's the projected time period of that? that transfer?
They say right now that it'll be the year 2061 that that wealth transfer will be completed. Now we know that from the research that much of it, probably as much as half, if not more, is going to transfer over the period. It used to be that when you talked about wealth transfer, people would say, well, I'll make that gift when I die, but now it's happening during people's lifetimes. This wealth is so profound that people need to make those gifts while they're alive. So again, you hear 69 trillion, put the number in perspective. We know that somewhere close to 30 trillion is actually going to transfer over the period. What is 30 trillion? So I tell people that that's what's already given. So if we know that even just 1% of it, 1% of what's already going to be given would go to Christian ministries, that 1% would equal $300 billion. $300 billion. It's a staggering amount of money with 1% of what's already going to be given.
And you obviously have kingdom ambition. That 1% could have an incredible impact on God's kingdom and God's work.
No question. And of course, we want a lot more than 1%.
Right.
But if we put just, let's say we're not going to be successful and we'll achieve 1%. With $300 billion, we're here at Houston Baptist University, and you've heard me say it, that if there are 100 plus Christian universities and colleges around the country, and we wanted to endow each of them with $1 billion, we'd still have $200 billion left over. We can complete Bible translation, the majority of Bible translation, with about $1 billion. So now we have, what, 199 billion left over. Paul Eshelman and some of his group are out there, and they're saying that we can complete getting the gospel out to the last unreached people groups. Maybe another 50 billion. Well, we still have, what, $140 billion left over to solve some of the world's greatest problems.
And given that potential opportunity and the incredible impact it would make, you approach this with the word family. And, you know, both Christy and I have always had the strongest motivation of family. You know, we just felt like if our marriage degenerates or our kids go off, you know, anything we've done will not be worth it. You bring in this beautiful concept of family legacy. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, and just to back up for a moment, giving today across the country, every person across the country, flat number is been at 2% of income. So, and this number's been the same for 40 years. Basically back to the Great Depression, where we know across the country, people aren't even given a tithe. So we have pastors in our churches that are saying, oh, you should tithe, and they're not even doing that. And so you have to ask the question, why is that? And we think it's because we've made giving so transactional. It's like write your check, put it in the plate, or do the e-check thing, whatever it is.
Right.
And it becomes a transaction, and we've missed the joy and the beauty of making a difference in the lives of people. Well, that starts, though, in the first place with what were we taught at the family level. And so at the emotional level, we know that that when you work with a family, the thing that will cause the greatest grief, Proverbs talks about it, a foolish son is a grief to his mother. People care about family. They want to make sure that they have good family. And so that's where we really start, is with the idea of family, is that we want to encourage families to be multi-generational in nature. And that gets to who they are. Book of Ecclesiastes talks about that God's put eternity into the heart of man. We want to be part of something that's firm and part of something that's going to last. Well, what's the first place that we receive our set of values? It's the family. The family is the first place that we connect into that. And just in the same way you said it, you don't want your kids to go out and mess up and to have all kinds of problems. You want your kids to be successful and to carry on with a set of values. And you want your kids then to pass it on to your grandchildren, and your grandchildren to pass it on to your great-grandchildren. That's the biblical idea of family that I think that we have missed so much.
Now, you have spoken on that, and you delineate the different steps that, so let's just presuppose I'm a family at the table with Bill High, and God has given me resources, but I know that, and as we all know, after you've been on a few jets and had a few new cars and eaten a few steaks, it's kind of like, is that all there is? I totally understand why affluent people kill themselves. If that's all your life's about, then you're going to find out quick what Solomon said 37 times in Ecclesiastes: vanity, hopeless. But I'm a family, I come to you and I say, help me build a family that has a legacy. What would you say to me?
Well, first, in many cases, what that family has been talked about is legacy is doing an estate plan. Mm-hmm. And that's a transactional component. Right. It's like, do the documents and you're done. And sometimes we walk into families where that's the case. They think, hey, I'm done because I've done my estate planning. They didn't really like their lawyer in the first place. But right. They think they're done. But the game changer is when we talk to them and say, well, what's your family going to be like in 5 generations? Will your kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, will the children that you don't know still carry on? You've probably heard it, that your children are living messages to a generation that you'll never see. Mm-hmm. And that's what we try to encourage families to first recast their vision for what they think about. Not an estate document, not a set of documents that you call it done, but kids who are going to carry on with a set of values for generations to come, with the idea being that as we look forward, that when we stand in heaven, when God asks us and says, hey, Jerry, how did you do? One of the first things he's going to ask us about is, how's your family? How's your wife? Mm-hmm. How's your kids? Mm-hmm. And we want families to imagine that great cloud of witnesses is first this group of family, their kids and grandkids, who still are witnesses to this person who said, hey, I hold to the name of Jesus for all my days. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. And then from out of that will be that subset of people that you've witnessed to and encouraged and preached and pastored to, all those kind of things. That's the circle that we try to cast this vision for. And so at the very heart of it is to reset the vision for what we think family is supposed to be.
And so family develops a mission statement.
Exactly. So once you reset that, then you're going to actually facilitate the process of helping a family develop a vision statement. What do you want to be? What's the God-sized dream for your family? What would you desire that to be? And it's usually an impossible, exciting kind of thing, but you want the family to get on board with that kind of thing. And then it's a mission. Here's what we do to accomplish the vision. Here's what we'll practically do. What does that look like? And then we're going to help them develop a set of values. And that set of values may be very simple, but 3 to 5 values that define and govern who they are. That's all about setting the compass settings for those coming generations. And then we want to have them take that set of mission, vision, values and teach that and be part of communicating that and living that out on a day-by-day basis with the generations that they're involved with.
You also have, in your book, Charity Shock. I mean, we might just give a list of the different books you've written. That's one I'm reading right now.
Well, Charity Shock, we wrote specifically for the Christian ministry world, which was really designed to address the trends that are going on in the fundraising space, chief of which is this wealth transfer issue, the major donor issue. But today, the fundraising world is like the proverbial frog in the pot. The pot is, the heat's getting turned up and that frog's going to boil. And because giving's going down, the number of givers are going down, we're in a place where if we don't reverse this trend, then we're going to be in trouble in about 10 to 15 years. So we're in a real place where things have to change. So that's one of the things I teach and speak on. It's a huge issue right now. It's not a huge issue just from the fundraising perspective, but more from the discipleship perspective. So we've written a book too with David Green called Giving It All Away and Getting It All Back Again, where we really share the story of David and Hobby Lobby and ultimately some of his questions about how do I have a successful family legacy and how do I deal with the issues of wealth, not just money, but the intellectual, social, spiritual, emotional, and financial capital, and how do I pass on true wealth to the generations to come. So those are a couple that we've worked on and are out there in the public.
In a number of cities, you've done CEO roundtables with Mr. Green. What is the purpose of those roundtables, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so when we gather CEOs to meet with David Green, they're fascinated by the story. Of course, number one, a lot of people associate them with the Supreme Court case of a few years back where they took on the federal government and the government basically trying to impose their values against the religious liberties of that family. So they hear about that story, but then they're fascinated as well by the fact that David's essentially given away the stock of the company, this multi-billion-dollar company. And the number one thing that we have come out of that with those CEOs and business owners is the fact that they come out of there saying, do I really believe that God's the owner of everything that I have? Or am I a steward? It's easy to say that I'm an owner or that God's the owner. It's another thing to do something about it. So we've literally seen people who come out of that and begin to give away what they had claimed as ownership and start putting it to kingdom purposes.
What kind of dynamic takes place in those roundtables? What are the remarks that people say? I mean, obviously David Green is like the epitome of giving. It's got to be a beautiful moment when you see that light turn on.
It's only usually about 20 people. And even better if it's husband and wife. Sometimes the guys won't get their wives there, but it's pretty cool to watch what happens because number one, David's very humble, and he just starts off by saying, typically, this is our story. It's not your story. You've got to figure out your story. You've got to wrestle with these issues the same way that I did. You've got to address how the Holy Spirit's going to deal with you on these issues. And then as David shares some of his story, they begin to ask questions. Why do you do this? Why do you give 50% of your income? For many of these people, they'll walk in there thinking that they're generous themselves because they wrote a big check, but they actually are still part of that 2% club, or maybe they're at 10%. But David will even walk in there and say, 10% is training wheels. And so they're challenged just on what they're giving and how much they're giving. But ultimately they get challenged based upon this ownership question. And so it's really fun to see these people begin to wrestle with things. And that's what we really encourage is we want you to wrestle with what God's put before you. We've had people walk out of it though, say that that day that we spend with those folks is like one of the most impactful days of their entire lives.
It's beautiful. Now you're putting together a center to really teach, and as we know, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, and there's a lot of people that need training. What's your vision for the next decade? If you could cast the vision for the next decade and taking what obviously God has allowed you to experience, what would you want to do?
Yeah, so we talk about two big words, family legacy and generosity. So we believe that certainly at the university level, if we can begin to teach this idea that family is meant to be multi-generational, whether you have money or not, God intends for your family to carry on with a set of values. And so if we can reach that level and start that discussion anew and change about how we're thinking about family, we can change the trajectory of family in the country. I mean, today, largely family is, hey, you have some kids and it's, have two, and they're fun, but they cost a lot. We want to change the perspective that those kids are those living messages to the generations we'll never see. It will hold this country together. It will hold the world together because we were meant to have impact. The whole Genesis idea, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, make the world more beautiful and more creative. So we want to teach that idea. and have students grab a hold of that so they can take it back to their communities and live that out in their own families, but then to be the purveyors of this message as well. We know that as we succeed with that at the family level, then we impact the idea of generosity. We'll see families who will become more generous, some of them who have wealth, some who will create wealth. But we know that the success of families is always driven by the fact that you can never keep it for yourself. If you do, that's selfishness, that becomes greed. But when you teach families to give away your life, you reflect the person and the character of Jesus, who is the greatest legacy of all.
No question. Bill, when you see these families come together, how can an organization or any parachurch or educational university bring you to town to do a round table? What's the beginning steps to get going?
One of the easiest things for people to look at is there's no question that the great wealth that's stored up is in the business owner world. And so if you want to fire your rifle shot, you gather your top 25 business owners. So it's not big. It's not something where you have to hold a big event, but you look for intimacy in that environment. And then where we come in and we help a ministry or a university like this is we come in and we teach this vision of family, and then we walk through how do you develop a mission, vision, values. We ask that important question of legacy. And then perhaps, maybe then the idea is that they begin to think about their legacy with respect to that university and the number of children and families that they can impact at that university level.
As you and Mr. Green have written these books, you've also launched this campaign on Fox Business. Are there any other strategies that you're thinking about in the future beyond capturing digitally and training, both family legacy, generosity?
Well, we love the university level at one level because that will get us on the academic side of things. There's a number of things that need to be written and developed. There's a whole set of things around family. There's a documentary around family. Again, we need to reverse our view of family and have it conform to a biblical view. But as we work with some of these families that are family business owners, I believe we're going to begin to see them collaborate. They'll begin to meet together. We'll be able to hold family institutes. And those families will come together, and you know how this happens, that as those families come together, they will begin thinking themselves about how they together can solve some of the world's great problems. So that's one of the things that will happen, but then one of the other cool things that will happen, these families are often very entrepreneurial. And so they are going to help fund some of the future entrepreneurial efforts of perhaps students right here at this university. They'll create funds, and they'll create VC funds and PE funds, and they'll help, that young student who will be able to buy that business, and they'll provide mentoring. So that's how some of this cycle will continue to spin well on into the future. At a nationwide level, we do want to be able to take this idea of the 24-hour Vision, Mission, Values Summit and begin to have this go out on a mass level so that millions of families could say, I know my compass setting, I know where I'm going, I know what my goal is. And we'd accompany that with other video and other support materials so we can see family grow in a unique and different way.
Outstanding. We've been talking to Bill High. He's the CEO of the Signatory, obviously one of the great thought leaders today on impacting the world by ordering and strengthening families and understanding the principles of generosity. Bill, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.